Last time we spoke about the Siege of Japan. In the summer of 1945, Japan faced its most devastating siege. A pivotal component was the aerial mining campaign entitled Operation Starvation, masterminded behind General Curtis LeMay. B-29 Superfortress bombers were deployed to lay mines in critical waterways, cutting off resources and crippling Japan's industrial capabilities. This silent assault inflicted chaos in Japan's shipping lanes, sinking over 670 vessels and significantly disrupting supply lines. Amidst this turmoil, the Allies intensified their firebombing campaigns, targeting urban centers like Tokyo, Osaka, and Kobe, leading to extensive devastation and a loss of life. By August, Japan's civilian and military morale crumbled under the weight of destruction. The climax of this siege came with the Atomic Bombing of Hiroshima, which unleashed unparalleled destruction. As Japan's leadership struggled for options, the nation was effectively brought to its knees. The relentless siege had achieved its goal. Japan was irrevocably broken, marking a profound moment in history. This episode is the Atomic Bombing of Nagasaki. Hello again and welcome back to the Pacific War Podcast week by week. I'm your dutiful host, Craig Watson. But before we begin, I just want to remind you all that this podcast is only made possible through the efforts of Kings and Generals over at YouTube. Perhaps you want to learn a bit more about World War II? Kings and Generals has an assortment of episodes on World War II and so much more. So go give them a look over at YouTube. So please subscribe to Kings and Generals over at YouTube. You can help produce this content by checking out www.patreon.com/kingsandgenerals. And hey, don't forget about our sister podcasts over at the Eastern Front Week by Week podcast and the Fall and Rise of China podcast, both written and narrated by me. And if after all that, if you're still hungry for some more history, why don't you check out my personal channel, the Pacific War channel found over at YouTube, and Echoes of War found on major podcast platforms. Over on Echoes of War, we are just starting a mini-series covering the entire Philippines campaign of World War II. If you'd like to support me further, please consider checking out my YouTube membership or my Patreon account at www.patreon.com/PacificWarChannel. By joining either of these, you get access to the exclusive podcast series, which is about 29 episodes and ongoing, early access to all the content I make, and voting rights for the subjects I will tackle next. Well, hello there. Again, like in the previous episode, this one is just going to state what happened. I am not going to delve into the whys just yet. I'm currently writing an entire special episode on why exactly Japan surrendered, focusing on the actions of Emperor Hirohito, the Japanese leadership, and, certain variables like 2 atomic bombs and the invasion of Manchuria. So rest assured, a big episode will be coming. I'm not going to lie to you, we're actually coming to the end of this series as well, and I'm not too sure what comes next, to be honest. If you'd like to hear some more special episodes where I'll delve into very specifics of the Pacific War, on subjects like, why was the Japanese army so brutal? What events did we not cover in this series? I can think of a few that we weren't able to hit. There's a lot left on the cutting room floor, as they say, so there could be a lot of special episodes I could do, but I'm not too sure what the direction of K&G will be when it comes to this series. I do know that for the YouTube version, it should be ending on episode 200. It seems that we're going to be focusing on the Eastern Front Week by Week podcast, which is very exciting. I am learning as I'm writing it going forward. Anyway, stating all of that, more news to come. Let's just jump right into it. So the worst had come to pass for the Japanese Empire. An atomic bomb had fallen, devastating an entire city. In a blinding flash, over 140,000 lives were lost. Yet this was merely the beginning. The Americans were poised to unleash destruction from the skies, a scale of devastation never before witnessed on this planet. The choices were grim: surrender or complete annihilation. The Japanese faced not only this overwhelming threat, but also another peril. The Soviet Union prepared to invade Manchuria, and other crucial territories were within its reach. As we last left off, the Americans had just been conducting a prolonged and devastating air and naval siege of the Japanese home islands in preparation for the invasion of Kyushu. This campaign culminated in the atomic bombing of Hiroshima on August 6th, reducing the once great city to ruins and leaving a staggering casualty toll that would forever haunt the Japanese people. Survivor accounts recount the haunting experience of wandering through the destruction, disoriented and unsure of where to go. They spoke of hearing the desperate cries of those trapped beneath crushed buildings or suffering from horrific burns. As small fires ignited by the blast began to spread, they coalesced into a firestorm that surged through the rubble, claiming the lives of many still trapped inside. Frightened residents jumped into the rivers of Hiroshima only to drown in their desperate attempts to escape the flames. Over 90% of the doctors and 93% of the nurses in Hiroshima perished or were injured, and most hospitals were either destroyed or heavily damaged. By early afternoon, police and volunteers worked tirelessly to establish evacuation centers at hospitals, schools, and tram stations. Yet tragically, many would die before receiving aid, leaving behind grim rings of corpses around these facilities. Some survivors who initially appeared unharmed would succumb within hours or days to what later became identified as radiation sickness. Most members of General Hata's 2nd General Army Headquarters were undergoing physical training on the grounds of Hiroshima Castle, barely 900 yards from the hypocenter. As a result, 3,243 troops lost their lives on the parade ground. Miraculously, Hata himself survived the explosion with only minor injuries, but many of his staff were not so fortunate, including Lieutenant Colonel Yi Yu, a prince of the Korean imperial family, who was killed. In total, the 2nd General Army, 59th Army, 5th Division, and other combat units in the city lost an estimated 20,000 troops. Survivors regrouped at Ujina Air Base on the outskirts of Hiroshima, where they organized relief efforts and maintained public order once martial law was declared. With Mayor Awa Senkichi killed at the mayoral residence, Hata assumed control of the city's administration and coordinated relief efforts. The initial reaction of the Japanese government to the devastation in Hiroshima was quite mixed. The Imperial Japanese Army and the Imperial Japanese Navy military leadership received only fragmentary reports about the tragedy, as communications with Hiroshima had been severed. Meanwhile, American and British radio broadcasts promptly informed ordinary Japanese citizens and their government about the atomic bomb on August 7th. The following day, Tokyo issued a press release confirming the bombing of Hiroshima, but notably did not state that the United States had dropped an atomic weapon. After technical teams visited the site of the bombing, they concluded that the enemy B-29s had indeed used a nuclear device. At this juncture, the diplomatic situation within Japan was chaotic. Many members of the Japanese cabinet believed that surrender was the only viable option, while others, particularly military figures like Hata, were determined to continue the fight. Looking back between July the 17th and August the 2nd, Soviet leader Joseph Stalin, British Prime Minister Sir Winston Churchill, and U.S. President Harry Truman convened in Potsdam to negotiate terms for the end of World War II. The Potsdam Conference is perhaps best known for President Truman's conversation with the Soviet leader on July the 24th, during which Truman informed Stalin that the United States had successfully detonated the first atomic bomb on July the 16th. Prior to leaving for the conference, a top-level civilian interim committee led by Secretary of War Henry Stimson suggested that Truman inform Stalin about America's new nuclear capability. This was intended to prevent the Soviets from learning about the bomb through leaked information, and Truman agreed to share the news. Now, historians have often interpreted Truman's somewhat firm stance during negotiations as a reflection of the American negotiating team's belief that their nuclear capability would enhance their bargaining power. However, Stalin was already well informed about the American nuclear program, courtesy of the Soviet intelligence network. This understanding enabled him to hold firm in his positions, complicating the negotiations. In the end, the leaders of the United States, Great Britain, and the Soviet Union, despite their differences, remained allied throughout the war. However, they would never meet again collectively to discuss cooperation in post-war reconstruction. One of the critical topics discussed was how to handle Japan. During the conference, Truman sought and received Stalin's final assurance of entering the war by August 9th. In accordance with the agreements made amongst the Allies during the Yalta Conference in February of 1945. On April 5th, Soviet Foreign Minister Vyacheslav Molotov informed Tokyo of the Soviet Union's unilateral abrogation of the Soviet-Japanese Neutrality Pact. He assured Japan that the treaty would remain in effect until April of 1946, even though the Soviets were already planning an offensive in the Far East. A Soviet invasion would prove beneficial for the Americans, as it could prevent the movement of hostile troops from Manchuria, Korea, and North China to the home islands of Japan before an invasion of Kyushu was launched. On July 26, the United States, Great Britain, and China released a declaration demanding Japan's immediate surrender. The declaration called for the dismemberment of Japan's remaining empire, the demobilization of all military forces, trials for war criminals, and the elimination of Japan's capacity for future belligerence. While the declaration did not alter the requirement for unconditional surrender, critically it left ambiguous how the Japanese people might shape their future government. as it did not specify a direct end or continuation of the imperial dynasty. Thus, the crux of the matter was the preservation of the kokutai. Now, the kokutai was the national essence of Japan. It's what made Japan Japanese. It was all the aspects of Japanese polity, derived from history, tradition, and customs, all focused around the cult of the emperor. The government run by the politicians was secondary. At any given time, the kokutai was the belief that the emperor could come in and directly rule. If you are confused, don't worry, I am too. It's a very confusing term. The Meiji Constitution was extremely ambiguous. It dictated a form of constitutional monarchy with the kokutai sovereign emperor and the seitai, that being the actual government. On paper, the government runs things, but the feeling of the Japanese people was that the wishes of the emperor should be followed. Thus, the kokutai was like an extrajudicial structure built into the constitution without real legal framework. It's a nightmare, I know. I'll try to make an example. Most of you are American listeners, I imagine. Your Congress and Senate actually run the country. Well, it's more like BlackRock and military companies like Raytheon, but you get the picture. The president does technically not have executive power to override any and all things. But what if all the American voters simply felt he did? Let's say the president goes above his jurisdiction, and the American people violently attack Congress and the Senate if they will not abide by the president's wishes. That's kind of how it works, for lack of better words. Again, in a lot of the specials I will be rolling out soon, I'm going to explain things like the kokutai more thoroughly. Now, in response, Prime Minister Suzuki Kantaro expressed to the Japanese press on July 29th his belief that the Potsdam Declaration was nothing new and held no significant value. This statement was interpreted by Truman and his administration as a rejection of the declaration. In reality, since the Alta Conference, Japan had repeatedly approached the Soviet Union in an attempt to extend the Neutrality Pact and to enlist the Russians in negotiating peace with the Allies, offering very attractive territorial concessions in return. Again, I will explain it in future episodes, but to summarize very quickly, the Japanese had no illusions about maintaining any of the Asia-Pacific islands they had conquered. What they really wanted to hold on to was Manchuria. That was kind of the steroid that kept their empire alive. All of its natural resources were yet to really be exploited. It offered a place for Japanese settlers to go because Japan's population was simply booming, well, until World War II, mind you, and it was the breadbasket of Asia, all the food they could ever want. After they seized Manchuria, they couldn't let it go. The Japanese therefore chose to not officially respond to the Potsdam Declaration as they were awaiting a reply from the Soviet Union. However, this response never materialized. The Soviet Union was preparing for an invasion of Manchuria, fully aware that Japan had become a weakened nation after sustaining several defeats in the Pacific. In contrast, the once inadequate Russian military had transformed into one of the strongest forces of the time. They had successfully absorbed powerful German offensives in 1941, 1942, and 1943, and they rebounded with their own offensives in 44 and 45, ultimately crushing the military might of Nazi Germany. Motivated by the Allied requests for support and the desire to solidify the Soviet Union's post-war position in the Far East, Soviet leaders began planning in March for a final campaign to reclaim Manchuria, northern Korea, southern Sakhalin, and the Kuril Islands from Japan. However, most Soviet troops were stationed more than 10,000 kilometers away in Europe. As a result, forces and equipment designated for deployment to Manchuria had to be transported along a fragile and limited-capacity network over a 5-month period from April to August. Initially, they stockpiled equipment in the Far East to re-equip units already present in the region. Then a massive regrouping of forces to the east commenced in May, with units still arriving even as the campaign opened up in August. This shift, involving nearly 1 million men, effectively doubled the strength of the Soviet forces in the Far East from 40 to more than 80 divisions. Opposing Walewski's Far East command was General Yamada Otso's Kwangtung Army, along with the Manchukuoan and Inner Mongolian auxiliaries. Once the most prestigious and powerful unit in the Imperial Japanese Army, the Kwangtung Army had significantly eroded in strength and quality over the past few years due to the diversion of its main assets to other theaters. Consequently, many experienced units were siphoned off and replaced by formations made up of draft levies, reservists, and smaller, cannibalized units. By August, the Kwangtung Army consisted of General Kiteseichi's 1st Area Army in eastern Manchuria, which included the 3rd and 5th Armies, alongside 2 divisions under the direct Area Army control. General Ishiroku Jun commanded the 3rd Area Army in central and western Manchuria, encompassing the 30th and 44th Armies, plus 2 divisions, 3 independent mixed brigades, and 1 independent tank brigade under his direct command. In northern Manchuria, Lieutenant General Imura Mikio led the 4th Army, which was composed of 3 divisions and 4 independent mixed brigades. Additionally, the Army of Manchukuo contributed 8 infantry and 7 cavalry divisions, along with 14 brigades of infantry and cavalry. Mengjiang added 6 cavalry formations and other garrison forces from Inner Mongolia. Furthermore, Lieutenant General Kazuki Yoshio's 17th Area Army was stationed in central and southern Korea, totaling 7 divisions and 3 independent mixed brigades. In northern Korea, Lieutenant General Kushibuchi Senichi's 34th Army constituted 2 divisions and 1 independent mixed brigade. Recognizing that his forces lacked adequate training and equipment, Yamada's plans called for a delay at the borders, followed by a defense consisting of successive positions culminating in a final stand at a stronghold constructed in the Tonghua area. This strategy would see roughly 1/3 of the Japanese forces deployed in the border region, while the remaining 2/3 would be concentrated in operational depth to create a series of defensive lines. By July the 25th, Soviet forces deployed in the Far East were virtually complete. The Soviets meticulously tailored all military units from the front level down to the Army, Corps, Division, Brigade, and Battalion to effectively achieve specific missions. This tailoring took into account not only the strength and dispositions of the enemy forces, but also the terrain where the units would operate and the desired speed of the operation. Each unit was equipped with necessary artillery, anti-tank, tank, air defense, and engineer support. For instance, the 1st Far Eastern Front received heavy artillery attachments to provide the firepower needed to breach heavily fortified Japanese positions. In contrast, the Transbaikal Front was given heavy vehicles and motorized rifle support, enabling it to conduct rapid, balanced combined arms operations across the broad expanses of western Manchuria and Inner Mongolia. Within each front, armies assigned to assault strong enemy fortified zones had significantly more artillery assets compared to those operating on open axes of advance. Units deployed in difficult terrain were afforded extensive engineer support to facilitate their operations. At the lowest tactical levels, specially tailored forward detachments from rifle divisions and tank and mechanized corps, alongside assault groups from rifle regiments battalions, ensured that firepower and mobility necessary to execute high-speed operations were available. However, the final decision to attack would not be made until August 7th, when Vasilevsky committed the Transbaikal and the 1st Far Eastern Fronts to simultaneous assaults scheduled for August 9th. It is believed that the detonation of the atomic bomb the previous day prompted this hasty decision, resulting in the short 2-day period between the decision and the planned attack. Vasilevsky's strategy called for a double envelopment conducted by Soviet forces along 3 axes to secure Manchuria and destroy a significant portion of the Kwangtung Army. The Transbaikal Front was tasked with attacking eastward into western Manchuria, while the 1st Far Eastern Front would move westward into eastern Manchuria. Both offensives were to converge on Mukden, Changchun, Harbin, and Kirin, all areas of south-central Manchuria. Meanwhile, the 2nd Far Eastern Front would conduct a supporting attack into northern Manchuria, driving southward towards Harbin and Qiqihar. Moreover, the timing of an on-order operation against southern Sakhalin and the Kuril Islands would depend on the progress of these main attacks. For the western pincer, Malinovsky's plan involved the 17th and 39th Armies of the 6th Guards Tank Army, followed by the 53rd Army, launching the primary assault. Their objective was to bypass the Halong-Arshan fortified region to the south and advance towards Changchun. The success of the Transbaikal Front operation hinged on speed, surprise, and the deployment of mobile forces across virtually every sector, aiming to preempt effective Japanese defenses. To achieve this swiftness and surprise, tank formations were positioned in the first echelon of units at all command levels. The operation required tank-heavy forward detachments at each command level, with the 6th Guards Tank Army designated to spearhead the front's efforts. A tank division would lead the advance of the 39th Army, supported by tank brigades assigned to the first echelon corps and divisions. Planned rates of advance were ambitious, 23 kilometers per day for combined army units and an impressive 70 kilometers for the tank units. However, the operation involved significant risks. If the Japanese units responded quickly to the Soviet attack, or even if nominal forces occupied strategic positions in the Grand Kuingen mountain passes, the Soviet advance could be severely hampered. Additionally, the success of the operation relied heavily on logistical units' capability to supply these fast-moving formations deep into Manchuria. Despite these challenges, the Soviets confidently accepted the risks involved. Their mission was to crush the enemy in the border regions, cross the Grand Khingan Mountains, and occupy positions in central Manchurian plains from Lupei to Sorun by the 10th or 15th day of the operation. In support of this, the Soviet Mongolian Cavalry Mechanized Group was to attack across the Inner Mongolian Desert and southern Grand Khingan Mountains towards Khalgan and Dornor. Simultaneously, the 36th Army was set to advance from Duroi and Starel Tsuruketu across the Argun River to secure Helar. In the next phase for the second pincer, Merezkov's plan involved the 1st Red Banner Army, the 5th Army, and the 10th Mechanized Corps launching the main attack from the Grodkova area located northwest of Vladivostok. Their objective was to advance towards Mutanchang to exploit and secure Kirin, Changchun, and Harbin regions, while coordinating with the Soviet forces from the Transbaikal front. Additionally, the 35th Army was tasked with attacking from the Lezovadolsk-Iman area north of Lake Kaka to capture Mishan, Linkao, and Poli. Meanwhile, the 25th Army would launch an offensive from the northwest of Ussurisk to secure Tongning, Wanqing, and Yonchi areas. Once the first Far Eastern and the Transbaikal fronts converged in the Changchun area, they would advance towards and eliminate the final Japanese resistance on the Liaotong Peninsula and secure the strategic naval base of Port Arthur. Furthermore, Porkayev's second Far Eastern Front was to advance on a broad front across the Amur and Usurai rivers, extending from Blagovenchinsk to the south of Khabarovsk. Their movement aimed to exert maximum pressure on Japanese forces in northern Manchuria. The 15th Army would spearhead the main attack across the Amur River in the Leniskoye area, advancing southwards into the regions around the Sungari and Lukha rivers. In support, the 2nd Red Banner Army was designated to attack across the Amur River from Blagovchensk to Sunwu and then advance southwards to Chichihar. The 5th Rifle Corps would also be involved, attacking from Bikin to secure Paoqing and Poli. This multiple front operational plan aimed for the complete destruction of the Kwangtung Army units in Manchuria with maximum speed, effectively cutting off Japanese troops from reinforcements coming from northern China and Korea. These relentless mobile attacks, deployed across the broadest of fronts, were designed to prevent the Japanese from relocating forces, leading to their ultimate collapse and piecemeal defeat. As planned, the Japanese were caught completely by surprise when they received the Soviet declaration of war just an hour before midnight on August 8th. At the same time, they were facing a critical decision in response to the recent bombing of Hiroshima. After learning about the success of Colonel Tibbet's mission, President Truman released a pre-approved statement that detailed the atomic bomb's destructive capabilities and warned that if Japan did not accept the Potsdam Declaration, they may expect a rain of ruin from the air, the like of which has never been seen on this earth. Although Truman had only the plutonium Fat Man device remaining for use, he had been informed that a third bomb might be ready sometime in August. Amongst American military leaders, including Admiral Nimitz and General Spaatz, LeMay, and Twining, there was a belief that the third nuclear weapon should be dropped on Tokyo if Japan did not surrender. Conversely, some Japanese senior officials, like Admiral Toyota, speculated that even if the Allies had used an atomic bomb, they most likely did not have that much more at their disposal. They argued that the Japanese people should be prepared to defend their home islands to the death if favorable terms of surrender could not be secured. However, on August 8th, Prime Minister Suzuki instructed Foreign Minister Togo Shingenori, who advocated for negotiating with the United States, to inform Emperor Hirohito about the devastation caused by the atomic bombing of Hiroshima. Hirohito responded by authorizing Foreign Minister Togo to notify the world on August 10th that Japan would accept the Allied terms of surrender with one condition: that the said declaration does not compromise any demand which prejudices the prerogatives of His Majesty as the sovereign ruler. In the meantime, to increase pressure on the Japanese, Twining launched additional conventional B-29 raids. A total of 412 B-29s targeted the Nakajima aircraft plant in Musashino during a daylight attack on August 8th. However, the United States also needed to demonstrate to the Japanese government and people that Little Boy was not just an isolated experimental device. As a result, a decision was made to drop the Fat Man plutonium bomb on either the primary target of Kokura or the secondary target of Nagasaki, with this mission scheduled for August 9th. For this operation, Tibbet selected Major Charles Sweeney to pilot the B-29 named Boxcar to deliver the device. The leading B-29 would decide the ultimate target based on weather reports from 2 reconnaissance B-29s, followed by 2 additional aircraft assigned to scientific and photographic missions. To prepare for takeoff, the bomb was armed by installing 3 plugs. At 3:49 a.m. on August 9th, Sweeney departed from Tianjin, heading towards Yakushima Island to rendezvous with his escort. The mission began with complications that only escalated. A typhoon near Iwo Jima forced mission planners to relocate the planned rendezvous between Boxcar and her escorts to Yakushima, an island south of Kyushu. Sweeney took off at 3:49 on August 9th and headed north, but strong headwinds hindered her progress towards Yakushima. A further issue arose when a photographic specialist assigned to the support aircraft, Full House, was barred from flying due to forgetting his parachute. Consequently, Major Hopkins on Full House had to break radio silence to seek instructions on operating the camera. However, a more critical situation was uncovered when Commander Ashworth and his assistant discovered that an indicator was showing that Fat Man's electronic fusing circuits had closed, indicating that the arming was complete. A faulty switch, which incorrectly installed wiring, posed the risk of a premature explosion. As the mission continued over Yakushima, Sweeney successfully met up with Captain Bach, piloting the scientific support B-29, but failed to rendezvous with Major Hopkins. This meant that Boxcar would only have the great artist to accompany it for the final leg of the mission. According to Ashworth's log, they arrived at the rendezvous point at about 9 a.m., and they saw Bach at 9:20, while Full House waited south at the arranged position. Sweeney had initially agreed to circle Yakushima for only 15 minutes. However, he ended up waiting approximately 50 minutes for Hopkins to arrive, wasting precious fuel in the process. Due to the weather conditions, Hopkins had lost visual contact with the other B-29s and had to break radio silence again to locate Boxcar, but Sweeney did not respond. Despite reports indicating 30% cloud cover over Kokura, Sweeney chose to proceed there, believing the haze over the city would be clear. Boxcar arrived at the initial start point for the bomb run over Kokura at about 10:44, but unfortunately heavy cloud cover had settled over the city, preventing a successful bomb delivery. After 3 unsuccessful bomb runs, which consumed an additional 45 minutes of fuel, a flight engineer discovered that a fuel pump had malfunctioned, trapping 600 gallons of fuel in the auxiliary bomb bay fuel tanks. Despite fuel concerns, Sweeney chose to proceed with the mission, heading south and then east towards Nagasaki, which he reached at 11:50. Unfortunately, the weather there was as poor as it had been at Kokura, prompting Sweeney to make the controversial decision to drop Fat Man using radar guidance. Due to the fuel shortage, he only conducted a single bomb run. Just before initiating the radar approach, a hole in the clouds opened, revealing the aim point, the Mitsubishi Steel and Arms Works located at the Urakami River. Fat Man was dropped at 11:58 and detonated approximately 1,650 feet above the target after a 50-second descent. Initial reports indicated that the explosion occurred about 500 yards north of the Mitsubishi plant and roughly 0.8 miles south of another Mitsubishi facility. While Fat Man had a more powerful detonation, the damage and casualties were not as extensive as those caused by the lower-yield Little Boy. The topography of Nagasaki, surrounded by hills, confined the explosion to a bowl-shaped center in the city, in stark contrast to Hiroshima's relatively flat landscape. Of the 7,500 Japanese employees at the Mitsubishi plant, 6,200 were killed, with an additional 17,000 to 22,000 employees at other war plants and factories also perishing. Unlike Hiroshima, where the military death toll was quite high, only about 150 Japanese soldiers were killed instantly, alongside at least 8 prisoners of war. Overall, it is estimated that around 45,000 civilians lost their lives due to the explosion, with between 50 to 60,000 sustaining injuries. The radius of the total destruction extended about 1 mile, with fire spreading across the northern portion of the city to 2 miles south of the impact point. Thankfully, no firestorm developed as it had in Hiroshima. Bomb damage to physical structures in Nagasaki were erratic. Some areas, such as the Nagasaki Arsenal and the Mitsubishi plant, experienced significant destruction, while nearby locations appeared almost untouched. Despite this, Sweeney's mission resulted in an estimated 68.3% loss of pre-existing industrial production, excluding the harbor facilities, without disrupting the critical North-South National Railway track. While Fat Man's debut was historic, its destructive capability was comparable to other B-29 incendiary night raids. After circling Fat Man's expanding mushroom cloud, Sweeney headed towards Okinawa at about 12:05, with only 300 gallons of fuel remaining. Fortunately, Boxcar's crew managed to return to Yotan Field with just 7 gallons of fuel left, successfully making their way back to Tianjin later that same day. Simultaneously, Vasilevsky's Far Eastern Command began its offensive just 10 minutes after midnight on August 9th. Reconnaissance units, 4 detachments, and advanced guard units of the Transbaikal Front crossed the border into Inner Mongolia and Manchuria. Initially, attacking units faced resistance primarily in the 36th Army Zone, where their attack routes passed through fortified Japanese border installations. However, most assault units advanced with little opposition. By 4:30, the main force units had begun to follow closely behind the assault troops. General Isepliev's Soviet Mongolian Cavalry Mechanized Group advanced in 2 marching columns, 200 kilometers apart. By nightfall, they had penetrated 55 miles into the arid expanses of Inner Mongolia, moving southwards towards Dolonor and Kalgan, while sweeping aside small detachments of Inner Mongolian cavalry. Meanwhile, Lieutenant General Alexei Danilov's 17th Army entered Inner Mongolia virtually unopposed in 2 columns, advancing approximately 70 kilometers by nightfall. To the left, General Andrei Kravchenko's 6th Guards Tank Army led the main attack into Inner Mongolia in 2 columns, encountering limited opposition and rapidly advancing about 150 kilometers until reaching the foothills of the Grand Khingan Mountains, west and north of the Korokan Pass. Simultaneously, General Ivan Lunikov's 39th Army advanced along 2 divergent axes. The 5th Guards and the 113th Rifle Corps gained 60 kilometers as they bypassed the Halong-Ashan and the Wukako fortified regions to the south. Meanwhile, the 94th Rifle Corps struck northeast towards the rear of the Hailar fortified region, swiftly overcoming light resistance. The 124th Rifle Division was also deployed between both axes to probe towards the Halong-Ashan fortified region. Lieutenant General Alexander Luchevinsky's 36th Army advanced on 2 fronts, with the 2nd and 86th Rifle Corps successfully crossing the rain-swollen Argun River between Stado, Tsurakhaichui, and Duroi, securing key bridges north of Hailar. Additionally, an operational group of 2 rifle divisions attacked across the border, establishing a foothold in the small fortified post at Manchuria. During the night, Luchensky sent the 205th Tank Brigade to assault Hailar from the northeast, while the 152nd Rifle Regiment maneuvered to attack from the southeast. This offensive succeeded only in capturing the railroad station in the northern part of Hailar, as the southern and eastern sections of the city fell the following day. However, the 80th Independent Mixed Brigade continued to delay the Soviet advance, while the 119th Division moved eastward to fortified positions in the Grand Khingan Mountains, stretching from Yakoushe to Pukotu. Despite these setbacks, the 36th Army had advanced about 60 kilometers into Manchuria and had partially secured Hailar. Meanwhile, to the east, drenching from the thunderstorms, the 1st Far Eastern Front advanced under the worst weather conditions during the dark of night. This totally surprised the Japanese defenders and led to the rapid reduction of many unsuspecting border posts. General Nikolai Kyulyov's 5th Army spearheaded the main attack, with the 17th, 65th, and 72nd Rifle Corps quickly breaking through the Volensk Setter of resistance. They achieved a penetration of about 16 to 22 kilometers towards Naicaoying and Majiazhou. Meanwhile, the 105th Fortified Region and the assault engineer units attacked the Sufenho Center of Resistance, successfully seizing railroad tunnels on the main railway line into Manchuria. In support, General Afanasy Beloborodov's 1st Red Banner Army to the north launched an assault with the 26th and 59th Rifle Corps over the 16-kilometer sector through heavily wooded, wet terrain. As they advanced, they constructed roads through the forests. By nightfall, 4 divisional elements had advanced 5 to 6 kilometers deep into Manchuria, crossing the Shitao River and half the forested region. At the same time, the 6th Field Fortified Region and the 112th Fortified Region stormed several Japanese border positions and slowly advanced north towards Mishan. This assault supported Lieutenant General Nikanor Zakhvatayev's 35th Army, which deployed the 66th and 363rd Rifle Divisions to cross the Sungacha River to attack towards Mishan. The 264th Rifle Division and the 109th Fortified Region assaulted across the Ussuri River against Hutao. After securing a crossing over the Sangacha, the 66th Division penetrated deep into the swamps, managing to advance 12 kilometers into Taichao. Meanwhile, the 363rd Division successfully broke through an enemy strongpoint at Malihongquang, ultimately reaching the southwest edge of Taichao. In turn, the 264th Division crossed the Ussuri River and outflanked Hutao to the south, capturing the railroad depot there and cutting the bridgeway to Hulin. Lastly, General Ivan Chisakov's 25th Army launched an attack along two principal axes. The 39th Rifle Corps and the 259th Tank Brigade targeted Tongying, while border guard units, along with the 108th and the 113th Fortified Regions, crossed the Hunchun and Tumen rivers to engage Japanese defenses in Korea and Hunchun. Shielded by rain, the Russians swiftly captured or subdued the Japanese forward defenses along the front. By nightfall, the 39th Rifle Corps had advanced 10 to 12 kilometers into the Japanese rear along the Padsenaya River. Lead elements, reinforced by the 72nd Tank Brigade, began their assault on the town of Tongying and the vital railroad line at Tumen. To the north, the 2nd Far Eastern Front deployed its forces across three separate sectors. Lieutenant General Stepan Mamanov's 15th Army was tasked with the main assault across the Amur River in the center of the front sector. Lieutenant General Makar Trokin's 2nd Red Banner Army was assigned to conduct a supporting attack against the Alphen and the Sunwu fortified regions, while Major General Ivan Pashkov's 5th Rifle Corps aimed to seize the fortified region at Jaho. Supported by the Amur Naval Flotilla, reconnaissance and advanced detachments of the 15th Army launched assaults without artillery preparation and rapidly secured major islands in the Amur River. Mamanov's rifle divisions then sent reconnaissance units across the south bank of the river, which was likewise secured against light opposition. Throughout the remainder of the day, reconnaissance units and advanced battalions of the 15th Army consolidated their positions on the islands in the southern bank, while main forces concentrated on conducting a challenging river crossing, hampered by heavy rains, high water, and mud. At the same time, assault units and reconnaissance detachments of the 5th Rifle Corps crossed the Ussuri River, successfully securing a beachhead north of Jaho, while the remainder of the Corps were transported across the river. From August the 9th to the 11th, the forces of the 2nd Red Banner Army limited their activities to reconnaissance, focusing on seizing the islands in the Amur River and harassing Japanese installations. This operation occurred at a critical moment for the Japanese, who were still reeling from the impacts of 2 atomic bombings. The Soviet Union had successfully initiated its invasion of Manchuria, setting the stage for a campaign that, although brief, was just beginning. I would like to take this time to remind all of you that this podcast is only made possible through the efforts of Kings and Generals over at YouTube. Please go subscribe to Kings and Generals over at YouTube and continue to help us produce this content by checking out www.patreon.com/kingsandgenerals. And hey, don't forget about our sister podcasts over at the Eastern Front Week by Week podcast and the Fall and Rise of China podcast, both written and narrated by me. And if after all that you're still hungry for some more history, why don't you check out my personal channel, the Pacific War channel found over at YouTube, and Echoes of War found on major podcast platforms. If you're looking to further support me, please consider checking out my YouTube membership or my Patreon account at www.patreon.com/PacificWarChannel. By joining either of these, you get access to the exclusive podcast series, which is 29 episodes and ongoing now, early access to all the content I make, and voting rights to the subjects I will tackle next. 2 atomic bombs have been dropped, and the Soviet Union has invaded Manchuria. For months, the Japanese have been working tirelessly to obtain better peace terms through the Soviets, hoping above all else to preserve the Kokutai. It was all for nothing. The Americans offered terms, leaving the Kokutai ambiguous. What would Japan, or better said, the Emperor do?